Coming up on Tech News Weekly, Jason Howell and I talk to Harry McCracken of Fast Company about that Amazon shakeup. Jeff Bezos is switching roles, and in comes Andy Jassy to take his place. What's that all about? Who even is Andy Jassy? Well, we're going to learn that. Plus, Sam Machkovech joins us from Ars Technica to talk about It's Goldeneye 007, and it's back with better big head mode. I don't know if it has big head mode, but anyway, it's back. Before we round things out with Geoffrey Fowler of the Washington Post to talk about Apple's app privacy labels and how some of them might not be as accurate as they claim to be. Before we do our stories of the week to round things out, including a story that'll touch your heart involving somehow GameStop and short stocks and all that jazz. Plus, I talk about Apple's rumored mixed reality headset. It's all that and so much more coming up on Tech News Weekly. Folks, the survey is just about to end here at TWiT. You should head to twit.tv/survey21 if you haven't gone there yet and fill it out. Why would you fill that out? Well, because it's very helpful for us, but also because it makes the shows even better for you. There's some questions there to help us understand who you are, because as we've pointed out before, this is just an RSS feed between you and I. And so it's helpful for us to know kind of the lay of the land, who the audience is generally, not specifically, so that we can improve upon the shows and make sure that our sponsors match with our audience and all that jazz. So if you haven't gone to twit.tv/survey21, please head there now, because that door is closing. Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 169, recorded Thursday, February 4th, 2021. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring is challenging, especially with everything else you have to consider today. But there's one place where hiring is simple, fast, and smart. That place is ZipRecruiter. Try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/TNW. ZipRecruiter is the smartest way to hire.
And by Uber for Business. Right now, for a limited time, receive a $50 voucher when you create your first vouchers campaign and spend $200. Go to uber.com/TNW to learn more. And by Barracuda. Hackers are always looking for the weakest link in your security configuration, especially in your email security. Barracuda's new threat analyzer tool helps you gain visibility into your particular vulnerabilities. Visit barracuda.com/TNW. Hello and welcome back, or welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. And there's a lot to cover this week. I am one of your hosts, Mikah Sargent.
And I'm Jason Howell. There is a lot, man. And one of the biggest stories that we're going to start off with. Before we do, though, just want to put out a simple and quick plug. We need some like fresh reviews for this show on podcatchers. So, and particularly Apple Podcasts. I think a lot of the reviews that are there are a little outdated. So if you watch and you listen to Tech News Weekly and you enjoy it, or really just however you feel about it, go to Apple Podcasts and let us know, rate, review. We'd really appreciate it. It would be nice to freshen those up a little bit.
Absolutely.
That's the only work we're going to challenge you with.
Exactly. It's your only homework. And if you do have trouble figuring out how to rate and review in Apple Podcasts, I've got some good news. Go to instagram.com/twit.tv. And I think one of the first posts you'll see is from my co-host on iOS Today, Rosemary Orchard, explaining the process. Because it is a little bit buried. It's kind of hard to find, but she walks you through every single step. So if you want to help us out and also learn a new skill in the meantime so you can help out all your favorite podcasts, check out that video and then head to the Apple Podcasts library. And look, we would love to see those. Genuinely, anytime one of those pops up and I get a chance chance to read a new review, it's a moment of happiness for me, and I know for Jason and for all of us here at TWiT. So you would be doing us a great service, and also it's just nice. It's nice to know that you're out there and that you care, and we do appreciate it. So thank you for that.
You put it perfectly. I completely agree. So thank you. We'll look for that. All right. So we talked about a little bit of the big news. You probably already heard about this news, but I would say arguably the biggest news of the week, from my opinion, is the fact that Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos announced that he's stepping down from his role, making room for Andy Jassy to take his place. And so we thought long and hard about who to invite on. And joining us to put some context, some great context to this announcement, is Harry McCracken from Fast Company. It's great to have you back, Harry. Thank you.
Hey, folks. It's great to be here.
Right on. Thank you so much. So I guess my first question is, Amazon has, long been on a roll, but especially the last year, Amazon has been just going gangbusters. They're definitely one of those companies that has really been positioned perfectly to benefit from the craziness that's going on with COVID and the lockdowns and all that. Did anyone see this particular announcement coming? Obviously eventually, but right now?
I think it's one of those things where the timing is a surprise. Once it happened, kind of the logic behind it is not mysterious. A lot of people on Twitter were kind of coming up with their own pet theories for how Amazon was trying to distract people from various, bad pieces of news about the company. But it seems more likely that it kind of is what it seems to be, which is Jeff Bezos wanting to spend more time on big ideas and the various other things he does. And Andy Jassy unquestionably being, the heir apparent and the person who was going to get the job.
So, okay. So I guess we'll start with Bezos on his way out, and then we can focus a little bit on Jassy, which is who you wrote about. So we'll talk about him in a second. As far as Bezos is concerned, he's moving into a different role. It's not like he's stepping away from Amazon entirely. Executive chair. How involved will Bezos be in that role with the company? Is this the kind of thing that gives him more influence or less influence, or it's just totally different? Do we even know kind of what that's going to look like?
I think that's one of the big questions. It seems like for a long time he has focused his attention on very high-level stuff and new ideas, and he's had these side projects going on for a while. So it may not be that radical a departure for him. It's a bigger deal for Jassy just because he's run one large part of the company, and now he'll have to think about all these other things that were not on his plate before.
Yeah, a lot of other things, not just running the company, but regulatory, the pressure of regulatory stuff happening with the company. Being, possibly being pulled in front of Congress for those kinds of things. Have to imagine that part of this is Bezos in a position where he realizes, hey, I don't need to take that kind of heat anymore. I can still have a lot of influence over this company and not be the target of a lot of this stuff. How do you think Jassy feels about that?
Yeah, sorry. Unionization is starting to bubble up for the first time at the company, and that's in the fulfillment centers. So that wouldn't have been Andy Jassy's problem in the past, and now it will be, and it doesn't sound like too much fun.
Yeah, indeed. But he'll make a good paycheck, so I suppose it'll be worth it for him. As far as Bezos is concerned, kind of transitioning out of this role and focusing more on things that he's really passionate about. Space is obviously one of those, and I think I saw a Fast Company article. I didn't link to it in the doc, but a Fast Company article that shows that that's going to be one of his bigger focuses. What does that look like? Taking more of an active role on that, and is that directly related to Amazon specifically, or is that just something that he's doing on the side?
Yeah, we actually, the piece we ran is actually by Jeff Bezos, so it's probably a pretty good look at why he's doing that. It's an excerpt from a book of his collected writings, and I think if you asked him, he would connect the dots between Amazon and Blue Origin, just because they're both about thinking big and inventing stuff. With Amazon as a public company that has to make stockholders happy and turn a profit and so forth, and Blue Origin is kind of purely a big idea in terms of thinking about what happens to people on Earth when we run out of energy. and so forth. So that's pure huge idea. He also, in his letter to his employees, said he was going to spend more time in the Washington Post. Very different from Blue Origin in that it's an actual business. It will be intriguing to see whether he gets more involved with any of the day-to-day decisions there than he has been.
So, like I mentioned, and like anyone that's been, paying any attention has seen with their own eyeballs, Amazon's doing really well right now. Is there any associated or potential risk for a CEO like Jeff Bezos, who has driven this company to the heights that it's seeing right now, for him to make that announcement and step back? How is Wall Street responding to this? Like, what are the risks inherent in making that sort of an announcement?
Well, and theoretically, it should be relatively smooth just because Andy Jassy has been at the company for almost a quarter century. He's just as good at Jeff Bezos as managing things the Amazon way, which is about invention and investing in things that might or might not take off. So I think there's kind of every reason to believe it will be relatively smooth, especially given that Jeff Bezos is still involved. I'd say for him, one challenge might just be letting the new guy do his thing, basically. If nothing changes in terms of how the degree to which Jeff Bezos is involved and every decision is exactly the one he would have made, then maybe the whole exercise is pointless, and it will be intriguing to see whether Andy Jassy, even if he does do things the Amazon way, puts his own imprint on the company.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm really curious about, and I realize this is like a totally subjective, probably a more opinion based than not kind of outlook on this or question to be asked, but I'll ask it anyways. Well, Jassy as CEO, in your mind, go in the direction of Apple, where obviously Apple has reached completely new heights and levels of innovation, all that with Tim Cook. Tim Cook has been arguably like an amazing CEO in his role with the transition. And I think in the beginning it was kind of like, oh shoot, there's a new CEO in town for Apple. What is this going to do to Apple? And it's only made the company stronger. And then I look at Google, and Sergey Brin and Larry Page, they stepped away. They really stepped out of the spotlight. And it's not that Google or Alphabet, let's say, is hurting necessarily financially. Their earnings were amazing, as one example. But the company ethos has shifted to a point to where people start to look at Google now, and they're like, well, why don't you bring back Don't Be Evil? It's like, you're being evil. What that didn't used to be the case. And it's easy to kind of like see the marker as the transition from the old folks in charge to the new ones. Where do you think this Amazon transition, if you had to guess, like where that's going to land? Are you more optimistic about what Jassy brings, comparatively speaking?
I mean, with these big transitions, generally speaking, it's relatively easy to keep your momentum short term if a company is doing as well as Amazon is. And the big question is, what happens if Amazon does run into a bumpy spot? They've also, they've been hiring like crazy during the pandemic. They now have 1.3 million employees. That's second only to Walmart. What happens if the pandemic is no longer on people's minds to such a degree and they start to love the idea of going out to retail stores again? Did Amazon build something that's going to make sense a year or two from now? So I think you kind of don't know about those challenges until they actually happen. And with a company like Amazon, it may be a while before Andy Jassy is truly tested, but you got to know he will be at some point.
Absolutely. There will be a time, who knows when it will be, but with a company like Amazon, the size and the impact, it's going to happen at some point. Now, you've actually interviewed Jassy in the past. You mentioned it in your article about him. What's something that kind of strikes you about him in this role from that perspective, from having the opportunity to kind of, be in the room with him? Do you see him as the right fit for CEO, and why?
Well, I think one interesting question will be the degree to which he becomes a public face for Amazon. when you're the head of AWS, you don't really need to present yourself to consumers particularly. And I think, except at AWS's big annual conference, Jassy has not tried to play himself up or be a public figure. I am guessing that for a long time to come, if you think about Amazon, the first person you will think about will be Jeff Bezos, and indeed, he may continue to be that public face. But it'll be interesting to see whether Andy Jassy does step into the spotlight. And as you think about things like antitrust questions, if Congress calls him to testify, he may not have any choice but to be in the spotlight in a way he hasn't. So I'd say that's one big question. Will he become a familiar face in the way that, say, Sundar Pichai has become pretty familiar, even if he doesn't have the household name status of Larry Page or Sergey Brin?
Sure. Yep. That all makes sense. Yeah. How do you do when the spotlight is on you as when you're sitting in that hot seat? And that's an important place for a CEO of a company this large. So we'll certainly find out very well at some point in the future anyway.
Satya Nadella comes to mind. He when he got the job at Microsoft, he was not well known. And since then, he seems to be very comfortable being in the spotlight.
Yeah, he's another example of didn't know what to think at first, but boy, has he done wonders for Microsoft in his role. So, well, Harry, love talking with you. Love bringing you on the show. Harry McCracken, of course, writes for Fast Company. If people want to follow you online, where can they find you?
Check out fastcompany.com, and also I'm Harry McCracken on Twitter.
Thank you again, Harry. We appreciate your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Always a pleasure, guys.
All right, up next, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to activate turbo mode and turn on big head cheat for 007. You remember GoldenEye 007 and there was the big head cheat? Yeah, it was pretty cool. Well, for some reason, and we're going to talk about it, GoldenEye is back in the news. Pretty cool stuff. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Businesses have had to be really flexible this year, obviously, from working remotely to, in many cases, pivoting their business models for long-term survival, for growth, doing what they have to do to stay alive, essentially. Performing arts companies, they're streaming stage shows now. I've heard so much about that. Musicals, symphony concerts, all online. Major clothing companies, they're producing N95 masks. Everybody has a mask now if you're in a clothing company, and hospital gowns. While beverage companies started producing hand sanitizer. Brands are spending more on e-commerce advertising due to projected rising online sales. So if you're in charge of hiring for your business, these pivots have really, made your job that much more challenging. And you probably didn't see it coming. You have no choice. When you're running a business, you have to pivot like that. Thankfully, there's one place that you can always count on to make hiring faster and easier, and that's ZipRecruiter.com/TNW. ZipRecruiter's technology actually finds people with the right experience for your job. It finds them for you and actively invites them to apply. So it's no wonder that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter actually get a quality candidate within the first day. You don't have to wait. You don't have to work so hard for those quality candidates. It's like they just come right to you. See for yourself. Right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/TNW. That's ZipRecruiter.com/TNW. And let ZipRecruiter take finding qualified candidates off your plate. That's one less thing you have to worry about, right? Go to ZipRecruiter.com/TNW. ZipRecruiter is the smartest way to hire. And we thank them for their support of Tech News Weekly. GoldenEye 007. Man, I loved that game back on the Nintendo 64. And I mean, it was a genre-defining game when it launched on the 64 back in 1997. Here we are nearly, not quite, but almost 25 years later, and Sam Machkovech from Ars Technica is perhaps more excited about it now than maybe you were back then. I don't know. What do you think, Sam? More excitement now?
Well, it's an interesting time. Hi, everybody. Good to see y'all.
Hi. Hello.
What happened is GoldenEye 007 was one of these video games that never came back officially as the old N64 game. Now, Bond video games have been coming out ever since, and that was one of the first big ones. It sold. Yeah. It was the second highest selling N64 game in the entire world, just beneath Mario Kart, which says a lot about how big it was back in the 90s. And then a bunch of other games from other companies came out. Nintendo and Rare never made another Bond game, and all of the other Bond games never quite lived up to it. And then this one, GoldenEye, which people have kind of clamored for in the remaster and remake world, hasn't happened. You know, if you grab the newest PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X, you'll find remakes and retunings of older games all over the place. But GoldenEye never got it. Turns out Microsoft, who bought the company Rare years ago, tried to make GoldenEye 007 as a sort of HD remaster, and they made it. And then they shelved it. They either canceled it or put it away, but somebody went to the trouble of getting the entire N64 game redone to look better on HD TVs, and then just canceled it. Now, fast forward 14 years later, that was back in 2007, and we started hearing teases and started seeing little images and started hearing things that it might be coming back. And sure enough, just about maybe 36 hours ago, I got a nudge from a video game sort of deep throat saying, you didn't hear it from me, but certain files appeared. And sure enough, I now am in possession of GoldenEye 007 as remade for Xbox 360. It gets up to 1080p or even actually 4K if you use an emulator. It replays all of the old games identically, but every single thing top to bottom has been touched up to look better than how things looked on the N64. Your memories of the N64 are not the same as how it actually looked. It doesn't look great, but all of the touch-ups have been done in a really interesting way. And the most interesting thing is, like a couple of other remakes, there's a button you can tap at any time to turn the game from old graphics to new and back. So if you think, oh, this remake doesn't look that good, then you can tap a button to see exactly how the old graphics look. And if you're watching the video version of this, you'll see a preview where some of the images go back and forth between new and then old. That's how it goes in order. It's new and then old. And so you'll see all of these touch-ups to the characters' faces, to the textures around. But most importantly, it actually runs at a steady frame rate. If you ever played it on N64, split screen was a big deal on N64. There was split screen gaming just wasn't a thing until the N64 had 4 controller ports. So when 4 people got together in a dorm or on a couch to play GoldenEye, the game would just slow down. Like if you threw a single grenade and there was an explosion, the game ran at maybe 12 frames a second. So now that's over with. Higher fidelity, everything works. So it's this incredible thing, and it leads to the question that you should probably ask, which is, what the heck happened? How did this game get lost after 14 years?
So Sam, I've got a question.
Okay.
What the heck happened? How did this game get lost for 14 years, Sam?
You know, I'm glad you asked. I have to stop talking every once in a while. You know, I get excited about this stuff.
I know how you roll.
But here's the thing. So there are certain viewers who probably have no idea about this game. It's from a certain boomer era. And now you might think, well, who gives a crap? But right around 2007, this was still a good time where people who had bought the N64 might be, getting a new system for their kids. Maybe they're getting the Xbox. So Microsoft owned Rare, and Rare was the company that made GoldenEye. They also made Donkey Kong Country and Killer Instinct and a bunch of other big Nintendo games. But Microsoft acquired Rare. So that was one kind of juggle was, well, Microsoft has a piece of the GoldenEye pie. Nintendo has another piece of the GoldenEye pie. So then you have to add, well, there's Activision. Activision started releasing 007 games. So they had a piece of the 007 pie. And then there was MGM and then the rights holders to Bond itself, EOM. So they all had a slice of the pie. So what happened was Microsoft just decided, let's just make it, and it'll be so good that everyone will say, yes, let's print money and shake hands. And they went and they made a completely finished working game. And then somebody at the negotiating table said no. Phil Spencer, who's the chief of Xbox these days, has put up public statements simply saying the issue is rights, not game development. But that was before this leak. So the idea being the game could have been made, but somebody in the rights holding process held it up. And the rumor has long been that the Bond license holders have said games have to run in certain ways. Number one, they have to have the current Bond, meaning a new GoldenEye 007 can't rewind to Pierce Brosnan. They would have to put Daniel Craig in or someone else. And in fact, we had a GoldenEye 007 remake for the Nintendo Wii, which was not. It was a completely different game. It had Daniel Craig in it, and it wasn't as good. Not because of Daniel Craig. I'm not trying to be a Bond actor bias. But there were also other rules about violence, about whether you could fight other heroes, and split screen wouldn't work because it's all of the heroes fighting each other. You could choose which of your favorite Bonds, and then you and your friends pit each other in that way. So no one ever got official confirmation, but I've heard rumors all over the place about it. The thing is, someone leaked a giant video from that was filmed in about 2015. That sort of hinted to this possibly coming out for a anthology of rares called Rare Replay. Well, it didn't happen, but someone made this mini documentary that's about 30 minutes about all these different people who worked on GoldenEye talking about how it got made, how Nintendo needed to be convinced, how the MGM people needed to be convinced, and how it sold like gangbusters anyway. It's a fascinating interview, and if you go to archive.org, you'll find this interview there. Nobody's deleted it, so I guess they're all cool with it. But that was the last big hint, and then these files started circulating. And I know I've been babbling a lot, but the long story short is there's a whole file trading system from the old Xbox 360. This was how people could beta test and then trade each other's files. So if I needed to have a tester get a file, but they needed to do it at home, they could just use this thing called PartnerNet and get the files. Well, that's how this game leaked. It was on PartnerNet for 1 hour and then gone. So someone downloaded it during that 1 hour span in 2007 and sat on it like an egg until this week. So it appeared on there. I'm trying to understand how that suddenly happens for an hour. It sounds like it's probably a mistake then, right? It was accidentally served. I think somebody just decided at Rare, like, we need to beta test this, so here I'm going to put it up. But the thing about that service was you didn't need passwords. You could just get files. It was one of the most insecure beta testing file trading things ever. I mean, 2007 was a different time for InfoSec. So
sure.
And for that 1 hour where they're like, okay, grab the file and then I'll cut it off, other people who weren't supposed to see it got it.
Well, and what's impressive about that is that was 2007 that file, kind of leaked out. And here we are, how many years later, it took this long for this to make it even further than that. So whoever ended up with it, either wisely or not, I don't know. I don't know what you could do with that file. It's not like a rare to find, no pun intended, a rare to find like physical arcade game that has some value. It's just a file. Eventually it's going to make its way out, I would imagine, and here we are. If you're the one, I mean, it's almost like its own 007 movie. You're the one person who grabbed a file that has a lot of value and could unlock certain doors, figuratively or maybe literally. I don't know. But that was, if you go to weird nerd chatter sites, particularly the dark areas of 4chan, you'll see people complain and talk about the bartering of these files. Someone actually put out a zip file a month ago with a 100-character zip code password. Excuse me. It was a 100-character password, and the leak was, "You'll never crack this password. Good luck." And everyone's like, what is going on? It was a very weird chapter in the story that we all get to ignore now because the files have just leaked. I will not tell you where to find them, but if you read my coverage at Ars Technica, you will see enough hints where you might be able to find the files at a not password protected public site out there on the internet. There's enough details in there that someone could actually figure it out if they really wanted to. I mean, and that's actually a good question to ask. A little bit about the ethics involved in this. It wasn't very long ago. I'm trying to remember exactly. I forget the details, where there was this large cache of like Nintendo rarities that suddenly hit. The Giga Leak. That's right. And so the ethical, quandary around that being like, okay, it's great that all of these things that we've heard about for so long are finally out in the public, but what about the person who doesn't want that to be public? Like, what are the ethics around that? Where do you stand on that?
Question. That's a great question, because it really, in my opinion, depends on the flavor of what's getting out there. In the case of the Giga Leak, those were meant to be confidential pre-release kind of things. For example, stuff from one game that wound up in another game. So this was sort of test footage for something, and it didn't quite work. And so Nintendo sat on it for years and then paid it forward to another game. That's interesting from a historical perspective, but may not necessarily be the same thing. That to me is not the same as saying, here's a game that got finished And then no one was letting us buy it. Because if someone said, hey, Sam, here's Goldeneye, and you have to pay extra because MGM wants the rights and Nintendo wants the rights and so on and so forth, I would say, okay, I'm willing to pay that money because this is interesting to me. It's a really well-made game, by the way. I haven't even talked about what it's like to play. I'm playing it on an emulator on Windows 10. It runs swimmingly, and I can actually dump the files on what's known as a debug Xbox 360, which I happen to have one of those, which testers and journalists used back in the aughts and early teens. It runs great. And I just play this and I go, I want this. I want to do 4-player local at my house. I want to be able to play it online through Xbox Live and all that stuff. I can't. And so in this case, the ethics of it are, well, I want it really bad. And that's not necessarily a high watermark to clear for like why this should happen. But also, it's not being sold. Like the money is not exchanging hands. It is a certain theft, but at least it's not piracy theft where someone's like selling this as a burnt CD in an alleyway saying, do you want some Goldeneye? You know, that would be pushing it a little harder on a judicial or court level. So in that respect, I don't have a good answer to it because my Goldeneye bias is pretty intense. There's actually a game that came out after Goldeneye. It's called Perfect Dark. It didn't do as well. It was also Nintendo and Rare. It was made for the N64. Very similar. And people think, well, why don't you just play Perfect Dark? They re-released that for Xbox 360. It works on Xbox One. It's only $20, or it's even less if you get like an anthology package. It has the same sort of split screen and spy video gaming and blah, blah, blah. And the answer, you end up with things like, well, I like Big Head cheat mode. I like paintball gun mode. I like Odd Job as the tiny guy who runs around in the multiplayer arena. I like the original levels where you were using Bond gadgets and Bond movie locations to get through. There's just a mystique that GoldenEye 007 has for those very specific things, but it was also just a game of its era that was unlike anything else. You look at it now and you're like, well, it's kind of meh compared to modern shooters. But at the time, the idea that you didn't just rush straight ahead, kill things, and find the final door was very interesting. You had objectives. You had to feel like a spy. You had to use gadgets. And it really was compelling. Plus, you needed like $1,000 computer to play anything comparable at the time compared to a $200 N64. There was just a lot that it did very early that still, in my opinion, holds up. And that's what's been fascinating for me, is replaying this on an Xbox 360 emulator and saying, yeah, this is still pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I'm super compelled to check this out someday. Maybe I'll put a question mark on that. I would love to play it though at some point because I really was such a huge fan of that game back in the 64. So I'm happy you were able to write all about it and share what you discovered. Sam Machkovech writes for Ars Technica. If people don't want to follow you online, where can they find you?
Well, head over to @SamRed on the Twitters. But also, really, if you're not into piracy or if the ethics of it make you feel sketchy, go to arstechnica.com, look up our GoldenEye coverage. You get to see a lot of images and video of what could have been on retail. There's a guy out of Spain who found it a couple days before I did and uploaded a really long video of it. It's very complete. So if you can't play it, it's still, you get to experience it. So definitely go check that out. Jason, it's always good to talk to you all at TWiT, and I'll see y'all soon.
Sounds good, Sam. Take care of yourself. We'll see you soon.
Up next, just how accurate are Apple's new app privacy labels? We're about to find out. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Uber for Business. Look, it can be hard to find simple and effective ways to keep employees engaged and to keep customers happy. It's especially challenging when face-to-face interaction is limited. We all know that. Now, if you're trying to find a way to stand out to your customers or make your employees feel extra valued, you got to check out Uber for Business, because that is exactly what your business needs. You trust Uber as a way to request rides and order meals from restaurants you love. But did you know about Uber's platform designed specifically for businesses? I didn't until now. Over 160,000 companies are using Uber for Business to improve customer and employee satisfaction. If you're having a hard time getting people to show up or stay engaged in virtual team meetings or events, well, vouchers from Uber for Business let you add $20 to their personal Uber accounts so they can easily order meals through Uber Eats before the meeting. So think about it like, you've got to do this upcoming training and everybody's like, oh, great, I've got a training. Like, well, if you do the training, dinner is on me. This voucher can be dropped in there so you can have something to eat or something to enjoy while you are watching the training. This is a great way to make this happen. If you want to make your customers love your business even more, then think about offering them a voucher for a free meal or a ride when they make their first purchase or spend a certain amount. And companies can sign up, any of them can sign up for free and immediately start delivering extra value to the people who matter most to their business. Vouchers are simple to send and simple to redeem. Your business has total control over who gets them, when they expire, and what portion of the ride or the meal you want to cover. Vouchers are shared via email or text and can be redeemed with a single tap. And this is the best part. You only pay for rides they take or meals they order. So it's not as if you are paying upfront for all of those, because it's only at the time that they choose to redeem that meal or ride. Right now, for a limited time, so hop on this, go check it out, hop on this, receive a $50 voucher when you create your first vouchers campaign and spend $200. Go to uber.com/TNW to learn more. That's uber.com/TNW. And of course, terms and conditions apply. Uber.com/TNW. Thanks so much to Uber for Business for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly, and for that excellent idea of using vouchers as a way to motivate folks. All right. So something I think we've talked about on this show before, I think in one of my, story of the week, was about Apple's new app privacy labels. So this is a system that helps you to kind of understand what the privacy implications of an app are. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that. And also kind of how there might be some gray area, if you will. Joining us to talk about this is absolute hit of the internet, the viral internet sensation for this article. It's Geoffrey Fowler of the Washington Post. Welcome back to the show, Geoffrey.
Hi, glad to be here.
We are happy to have you. So, yes, I saw this story of yours all over the internet, and it was a very interesting story for me to read, because it was something that I've been pondering since the beginning of Apple's app privacy labels. So before we dig into things, we have to start with an explanation. Can you give us kind of the more in-depth, and let listeners know the more in-depth understanding of, when I talk about app privacy labels, what in the world am I talking about?
Yeah, well, I think pretty much all of the viewers right now sympathize with the idea that nobody really reads privacy policies. You know, there's those long things that you either, you click agree to, or you just want to get to the thing that you're using. But until recently, those have been the only thing standing in between us and a company being able to take all of our data and do whatever the hell they want to with it. So in last summer, Apple came out with what I thought was a pretty good idea at the time. During WWDC, they said, okay, we're now going to make apps who are in our app store publish what are essentially nutrition labels, but for your data. So on every single App Store listing page, there were going to be categories created by Apple where apps would say what kind of data they're taking from you and, in theory, what they're using it for. This seemed like a great idea. You could maybe glance it. Maybe we'd get to learn how to read app privacy labels, just like we've gotten to learn how to read the nutrition labels on packaged food. You know, we glance at it quickly. Oh, is there a lot of sugar in here? A lot of cholesterol? That way we can make better choices about what's happening with our data. That was the theory, at least.
Yes, exactly. That was the theory. So in practice, things are a little bit different. You think that it's definitely going to be an understanding of how those apps are tracking you. But as Apple notes, as you've noted, it's not necessarily the case, because it is developer reported. So it's my understanding you found an app that said it was doing a whole lot more than it was, or it was doing a whole lot less rather than it was actually doing. Can you talk about, that experience in and of itself, but then give us a bigger picture of kind of an estimate, if you will, of how many apps you think might also be not quite accurately reporting what they're tracking?
Yeah. So in December, Apple finally started the process of asking apps to publish these labels when they put out updates. Many apps have now done that, but some big ones like Google, have been very slow about it. But I started hearing from Washington Post readers who were saying, this is interesting. I'm looking at these labels, but then they were kind of looking under the hood at the traffic that was coming out of their phone, and noticed that it seemed like some of the apps were not telling the truth, that they were taking more data and sending it to more third parties than their labels might suggest. So I started on kind of a basic journalistic enterprise, which is trust but verify, right? So I started going through just using basic web searches to find apps that, for example, said, we are not taking any data at all. Apple gives these a blue check mark in the App Store, and they should be the best possible apps for your privacy. And when I started, I downloaded them onto my phone, and then I ran some software called Privacy Pro, made by a company called Disconnect, that basically logs and blocks connections to third-party tracking services, and seeing, okay, well, are they really not taking any of my data? And, these were just spot checks. There are, over 1 million apps in the App Store, so I couldn't check all of them. But golly, I checked a couple dozen, and I would say at least a third of the ones that said they were taking no data at all were just not telling the truth. They were taking data. They were sending, things like the advertising ID for your phone to Facebook or to Google or to all kinds of companies. And that was just one kind of app that I found was not telling the truth. Then I started vetting some apps that were just popular and maybe said they did take some data, but not much. I found some of them were not telling the truth really either, including very popular apps like the PBS Kids app, which is used by lots of families to watch video. It said that it wasn't, passing along identifiers for advertising, and yet I saw it connecting to Google and sending it my phone's identifier. So I just started realizing there was a big credibility problem in this system that Apple has set up. And of course, Apple was in the very tiny print in the detail page of every one, sort of disclaiming any responsibility, saying, we don't actually vet these. And I think that's a big problem. I think Apple does need to stand for privacy, because they certainly like to tell us they do.
Yeah, and not only that, I think, for a bit of editorializing here, I cover Apple a lot on the different shows that I do. And one of the things that bugs me about this is, as you pointed out, that tiny little text that says that. I think it needs to be explicitly clear to the user that these are, developer reported and not this tiny little text, because for the most part, I have to believe that folks are going to take things for what they seem, which, has its pros and cons, of course, and we could talk about that for days. But when you think that these app privacy labels are accurate, then you take them as accurate. And to have that little bit of text that's tiny in comparison to these beautiful icons and these, huge not huge portions, but rather small portions of text, meaning that it's simple to understand, that does feel a little bit disingenuous. And I'm curious, what is from your PBS Kids is a good example of this, I think. One would hope, one would feel that PBS Kids is not intentionally being a bad actor here. And so I'm curious, kind of from your look at things, do you feel like these companies are being purposely negligible, or are they maybe not knowing the full extent to which the stuff that they're using in their own apps could be tracking? And I know we can't use that excuse for everything, but do you think that it all is just nefarious, trying to grab data, or is it kind of a mix of things?
I think it's a mix of things. You're right. I think there are definitely some nefarious apps out there. It's worth reminding all the viewers that that the app data economy is giant, and there are definitely apps out there that are, claiming they need your location for what they do, but actually in the business of selling your location to data brokers, who then not only sell that to advertisers and people that want to track you, but also to governments. We now know, right? ICE is buying this data to try to track down people. So there is a big economy of that. And some apps may just be very much trying to mislead you. I think others may be confused about how the labels are supposed to work, about what Apple's really asking of you. Apple didn't do A+ job in designing these labels. In fact, it doesn't require you to even give the information that I think would be most important, which is who are they sharing the data with? That would be a key part of it. I also think what this reveals is that the way that the app ecosystem has evolved is that it's really, really common for apps to use embedded software, embedded code from other companies, right? There's the things that help it do analytics or whatnot, or track their own advertising. And a lot of app developers don't really know what that third-party code inside their apps is really doing, what it's taking. And this is the surveillance economy that has grown up in the app world, and this is the problem that we really need to address. So in the case of PBS, they were using Google, they said, to help them stay on top of how people were using their app, and they didn't really intend to help Google build out its advertising business. But the reality is the kind of data they were sending to Google was helping Google build out its advertising business. And that's not what you want in a kid's app. So after I contacted PBS, they did actually change their app, and they're no longer sending to Google the advertising identifier of every phone that uses the app, but they are still using some Google, which I would think is still something they ought to find an alternative for.
Yeah, absolutely. So then let's briefly kind of round things out here, because I do want to kind of talk to you about, you mentioned the process that you were using a little bit, but a lot of our audience is nerdy, and I think that they might also be curious about how exactly, because I don't know, can the average user pick up their phone, launch an app, and then know where their information is being sent versus the process that you used? Could you talk about that process? And then to round things out, can you kind of give the more basic user, the person who maybe doesn't have access to those kinds of tools, the tips that they might need to better protect themselves and their data in, even when these privacy labels may not be properly reporting what's going on?
Totally. Well, first of all, nerds, I love you. You guys are key to helping journalists do accountability. That is what this is. We are holding app makers accountable. We're holding Apple accountable. And if you guys discover stuff that you think is shady, please reach out to me at the Washington Post, because this is what we do as an organization. The specific tools that I use, so I used the Privacy Pro app made by Disconnect. There are other apps that essentially work as closed VPN. So they're just on your phone, and they log all the traffic that's going out of the phone, and they specifically look at the traffic that's going to known tracking companies. So Google, all the Adobe ones, the Yahoo ones, you name it. And so what I would do is I would close all the other apps on my phone. I would turn on Privacy Pro, then I would open the app, and then I would check back over in Privacy Pro and see what kinds of data connections it was making. So folks can do that definitely, and folks who want to block these kinds of connections permanently in their apps can use software like Privacy Pro to do so, but sometimes it does break some of the functions in apps. So that's why it's not something that I generally recommend for everyone. And that's just a really basic way to do it. You can get a lot more hardcore if you want. You could basically, set up another kind of VPN and use something like Charles Proxy to really catalog all the traffic coming out of your phone and see what exact kind of data is being passed along. I worked with the CTO of Disconnect, Pat Jackson, who's a rock star, who actually helped to do that for a deeper dive on all of the apps that we found seemed to be lying in their privacy labels, and so that's how we got some of those details. So yeah, this is important work. work. And let me just be really, really clear here. Apple, if like a journalist and a nerd who's very smart can find these apps lying this easily, I mean, basically we kicked a stone over and we saw, worms underneath it, then Apple really ought to be able to do this themselves. I'm sorry, they made $64 billion on the App Store last year. They could check some things just like I did. So that's the answer to your first question.
Yeah, that I preach on that last part. I 100% agree. All right, go ahead with the second part.
And so, so then what are we supposed to do with these nutrition labels? I actually wrote a piece, a sidebar that ran with my story in the Post, where basically I was like, all right, well, we've got nutrition labels, knowing that some of them are lying, but that means some of them are not, and hopefully fewer of them are going to lie in the future. If maybe Apple starts taking this seriously, or maybe the FTC comes in and starts suing some of these companies, or suing Apple for lying to consumers, which is against the law in the United States. How do you read these? They weren't designed quite as helpfully, frankly, as the nutrition labels are on packages, but there is still some things you can look for, some red flags. And this piece that I have in the Post kind of walks through generally how to read them and what some of the red flags are. Ones that I would say, a really basic one is like if the label is really long, like there's like a lot of stuff, that's kind of like a red flag that like this company wants your data for something. And what you can do is put two similar purpose apps right next to each other and say, all right, let's take, for example, the app Zoom. A lot of people use that for video conferencing. You pull that up, you see how much data it takes. Put that next to like Cisco WebEx. I did that and I discovered, wow, Zoom really takes a lot more data than WebEx. Now, look, this is just a rule of thumb. Sometimes there's good reasons that apps want to take your data. Maybe they're doing it for security or to keep out fraud. But still, that's a general rule of thumb. Another one is just like as you're scanning through what the apps are taking, one thing to look out for is to see if apps are taking what they call identifiers. These are the keys to the kingdom for companies that want to track you for advertising and for other purposes as well. And if an app's going to take identifiers from your phone, it probably ought to have a really good reason. Also, location. I know a lot of people are sensitive to that, but now we finally get to see if a little bit better if you study the labels. If an app is taking your location, what are all the different kinds of ways it's using it and who is it sharing it with? Because you might discover that they're actually selling it on to data brokers.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey Fowler, for joining us today and for helping our listeners better understand what's going on here. And as you said, holding these apps, developers, and Apple itself accountable for keeping our privacy protected, for keeping our data protected as much as we possibly can. If folks want to follow you online and check out all the great work you're doing, where do they go to do that?
Well, you can go to thewashingtonpost.com, where we have lots of stories about tech and other things. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Geoffrey Fowler. That's Geoffrey with a G, like the giraffe from Toys R Us, who's now retired, I think, or maybe living in a retirement home.
I got to tell you, one time I was throwing some stuff away in the dumpster at my apartment complex back in the college town that I lived in, and someone had at some point taken a full size plaster Geoffrey from Toys R Us, and they had thrown it away. And I said, there's no way I'm letting this go. And so for the longest time, I had a Geoffrey just sitting in my bedroom, just kind of hanging out with me, because I just thought it was so terrible that they maybe stole it, but then they threw it away instead of keeping it. So Geoffrey's been a longtime friend. Thank you so much, and for hanging around for that story. And of course, we will love to have you back on again in the future.
You bet.
Thank you, Geoffrey.
All righty, folks. Up next, our stories of the week. But first, it's Barracuda, who are bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. Hackers are always looking for the weakest link in your security configuration, especially in your email security. It's so easy to go in there and click on something and then go, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. Oh. Well, Barracuda's new threat analyzer tool helps you gain visibility into your vulnerabilities. If you can find your vulnerabilities first, you can defend against cyber attacks. That's where Barracuda's new threat analyzer tool comes in. From traditional malware to the latest spear phishing, account takeover, and conversation hijacking, Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats. And the thing is, it takes several different layers of security working together to actually protect you effectively against all 13 threat types. If you're not fully protected, cyber crooks are going to figure out where you're vulnerable. It's literally what they spend all their time on. When they find the gap in your security, they just need to choose the right threat type and customize it to get into your system, which of course can end up costing you millions of dollars and of course your reputation in the market. And here's where it gets hard. With hundreds of highly targeted, personalized threat variants emerging daily, and many different kinds of on-premise and cloud-based email systems, it can be really challenging to identify your specific gaps or vulnerabilities. That is what the Barracuda Threat Analyzer is for. It's incredibly simple and fast to use. You go to barracuda.com/TNW and answer a few multiple choice questions about your email security setup. It takes about 2 minutes, and the Barracuda Threat Analyzer provides a custom report telling you which threat types you're most vulnerable to. And you'll get custom recommendations on how to strengthen your defenses against those attacks. It's free, and it's very easy to use. Barracuda's December spear phishing report found 12% of all spear phishing attacks are business email compromise. That's up from 7% in 2019. That kind of growth shows how successful these attacks can be. According to the FBI's most recent Internet Crime Report, business email compromise attacks led to over $3.5 billion in losses. And even Shark Tank's Barbara Corcoran fell for one of these attacks last year. Her employees fell for an impersonation attack and paid a fake invoice wiring almost $400,000. Yikes. They were lucky enough to realize that they had done it in time to recover the money, but some people aren't that lucky. Does your email security protect against those kinds of attacks? Well, try the Barracuda Threat Analyzer today for free, absolutely free, and get a full report showing exactly what you need to do to secure your email. Go to barracuda.com/TNW to find out where your hidden threats lie. That's the Barracuda Threat Analyzer at barracuda.com/TNW. All righty, Jason Howell, what is your story of the week?
Well, so I was trying to find something, that stood out to me as usual with the story of the week. And then I ran across a story that kind of gave me a smile instead of a harumph. So that's what I'm going with. Even though the story begins with GameStop, which it didn't take long for us all, I at least I'm speaking for myself, to get really sick of hearing about yet another thing about GameStop and the Reddit and all the things that were, associated with that whole Wall Street finance story thing. But I thought this was a good reminder that when someone comes across, a large fortune suddenly, it's good to kind of give back. Hunter Khan, I saw this article on CNN. Hunter Khan is a mechanical engineering student who actually got in on the whole movement to buy GameStop stock when it all started. I couldn't tell from the article whether he actually owned GameStop stock prior, because it mentioned something at the end about him keeping a certain number of GameStop stocks that he had initially. So that leads me to believe that maybe he was already in on GameStop before all this stuff happened. But he definitely bought a bunch more when everything started ramping up. And apparently, according to the article, he was in the camp of, sticking it to the man. The big boys on Wall Street, as he said. In the end, he ended up cashing out at the right time last Wednesday and gained $30,000 as a result. So he was able to cash out around $30,000. And he decided that it was important for him to pay his good fortune forward. He said, quote, "These events have highlighted a lot of corruption. And with this transfer of power, it's important that we don't become men in suits ourselves." So he ended up taking some of the money, not all of it, but a portion of it. And he donated 6 Nintendo Switch Lites multiple games, eShop gift cards, screen protectors, and cases to the Children's Minnesota Hospital. And, of course, the hospital was super grateful for that, and all the kids that are going to be able to, play a Nintendo Switch when they're in the hospital for the various reasons that they're there. That's certainly a great way to put a smile on a kid's face while they're in this dire situation, So he's encouraging others who profited to also pay it forward, kind of leading by example. And that's just kind of a story that I want to highlight, because that's a really good kind of thing to increase the visibility of, right? It's very easy in a situation like that, especially when you get swept up in the craziness of, all I got to do is put a little money there and it'll become a lot of money. And maybe that works out for you, maybe it doesn't. But if it works out for you, remember that before this happened, you had whatever you had. Now you've got all this good fortune. It's good to spread it around, right? It's just a good, nice thing to do. So, he earned $30,000. The Switch and all that, that's probably, right around $2,000. He's actually taking the rest of the money and paying off his tuition. I just thought it was a good reminder. It's easy to look at that story and be like, oh, well, they just wanted to make a bunch of money. How are they any different? And this is one way that you can kind of get back. And I just thought it was nice. Put a smile on my face.
I love that. That puts a smile on my face too. It's much more wholesome than my story. This is just more news about what's kind of been being reported. Apple working on a headset. At first, it was a long time ago. It was Apple was working on something called Apple Glass that was going to be an augmented reality product. And then some new reports came out from different places, including Bloomberg, talking about how Apple was going to first create a VR headset, and it was going to have, brilliant screens and displays and this and that. And it was not going to be kind of what would eventually become the AR product. It was going to start as VR and then become AR. Now there's a report out of The Information, which tend to have really good sources and pretty accurate on these kinds of things. And The Information is claiming that Apple is working on a mixed reality headset. So this is alleged to be equipped with more than a dozen cameras for tracking hand movements and showing video of the real world to people wearing it. So that's where the mixed reality portion comes in, more AR than just VR. Along with ultra high resolution 8K displays inside with advanced technology for eye tracking. So this is just some of the features that are supposed to be coming with this. Now, The Information says it viewed internal Apple images of a late stage prototype from last year, which show, and I'm quoting the article here, which show a sleek curved visor attached to the face by a mesh material and swappable headbands. That's a whole lot like the description for Apple's AirPods Max. The mesh material for the band and the swappable headbands really describes the structure that make up the AirPods Max. So I find that interesting in the role that it plays. Now, the article also includes a rendering of what the mixed reality device could look, how it could look. And it's almost as if they've taken an Apple Watch and kind of, I don't know if can we show this? Did you get down that far with the article that you have, John?
I know that
I can't actually show it.
Okay,
the information link, I think, is paywalled. Yes, if you go to TechMeme, you can see a small version of it right at the top of the list of TechMeme. And it really, to my eyes, looks a lot like a snowboard goggle.
Yeah, it does. Here is a link, John, that I'm dropping into Story of the Week and next to my link, to the right of my link. that's just the JPEG itself, so we can show that, because I want to talk about how it looks. It's got this rubberized band that is very reminiscent of the watch band from Apple Watch, the Apple Watch Sport Band, and then the front of it, the visor part of it, the button on the side looks a lot like the button on the side of the Apple Watch 2, and so I like that Apple's design language is kind of pervasive throughout everything. So Apple is reported to be pretty far along in this process, and it is going to be able to have real life objects that people can see in their surroundings while they're wearing the headset, and that it says that the company is using Pegatron, which is already doing assembly for iPhones and iPads to assemble this product. But of course, this is a brand new product, and it's likely to cost quite a bit of money. So we will see what comes out of it for sure. But I think the big thing for me, the most interesting thing for me, is the fact that this is supposed to be a mixed reality headset as opposed to just being a virtual reality headset, because that was originally a bit of a bummer for me in hearing about this product, because I am kind of waiting for Apple Glass to come. And so hearing that they were going to do full VR first was a little bit of a bummer. But this is not that. This is something completely different. So yeah, I don't know. A product that doesn't require me to log into Facebook and is in theory much higher quality at doing all of these things with 8K displays and Apple's probably M2 chip at that point. Pardon me while I clean my mouth, because I'm drooling at the thought of having this as something that I can use. So I don't know. I think my piggy bank's going to be filling up over the course of the next year or two so that I can get this product when it launches, because it sounds really neat.
Do you think really Apple's going to release this at $3,000? I mean, $3,000 just that is a price level that I just don't see. Like, Apple does amazing things. I love Apple products. I think they do really well. If they release a headset for $3,000, there is no way on earth even Apple can move enough of those for it to make an impact. Maybe I'm wrong, but $3,000 is like, that's an investment. That's like a computer investment. And I just don't know that anyone is at that point of paying the same that they would pay for, a laptop or a computer for this, when VR and AR and all of it is so experimental still. Like, yes, I'd be really curious to see. Like, is this more of an enterprise play than a consumer play? Then it makes more sense. If it's like a HoloLens sort of approach, because that's what Microsoft is really doing
about
there.
$3,500 Microsoft charges for those. There are a couple arguments here. One argument is that this product is essentially the developer preview, and so Apple is kind of rate limiting almost to make sure that this gets into the hands of folks who are going to be developing games for it, that it ends up being something that is kind of if you've got so many of them out there, then there's more chance for folks to have things go wrong with it. And there's, you know what I mean? There's a lot to kind of the theory behind this. But again, this is the thing that the information points out. And in one of the quotes that I've heard of from Bloomberg before, Apple has had a goal of shipping about 250,000 for the first year of its release. 250K is so much less product. Is far fewer headsets than what you would get from Apple's goals on shipping iPhones. So it does seem to be, that this is not kind of in a consumer product, but is a first go of things. I mean, this is the company that very infamously had a $10,000 Apple Watch made of gold. So it's
good point.
It's not that I think that Apple can sell the number that it wants to sell. I don't think that Apple expects this to be a runaway product, because really what I think Apple is doing here is some level of iterating in the open, but not in the sense that we've seen some other companies do. I think Amazon with its Fire phone was iterating in the open, but was doing it in a way that was it itself was not a finished product and ended up being kind of crap, just to put it bluntly. This is going to be a finished product, but it's not what Apple's goal is. And so what we're getting is iterating out in the open with what it eventually wants to create. But in the meantime, I do feel that Apple is working on a product that's going to it maybe not be that not quite make sense at that price point, but with 2 8K displays and an M2 chip. And this company also just released a pair of headphones that have like multiple individual processors running in each of the individual ear cups for all sorts of spatial awareness. So they kind of go all out. And on the products on which they go all out, the products they go all out on are definitely ones where they're not afraid to charge more money for them in the interest of truly going all out and trying to, create the best possible thing they can. So we'll see what ends up being released and how much of this is still just rumor, because as Rene Ritchie, I think it may have been on this show, but it could have been on MacBreak Weekly. He pointed out that this whole deal of Apple's internal stuff being kind of out in the public is new generation kind of thing. And if we had this level of people paying attention to what Apple was doing internally and being able to see what Apple was doing internally back when the iPhone was being created, there would have been reports about Apple working on a phone that had a rotary dial like the iPod, because that was an internal project they were working on. If they couldn't make the iPhone work, they were going to make that rotary dial iPhone be the first thing they released. And then there would have been a report about them working on a large tablet, because they actually were working on the iPad before they created the iPhone and decided to shrink the iPad down to the iPhone and focus on that before they launched the iPad. And those things we didn't find out until much later as sort of history versus history in the making. So what we're hearing could be some semblance of this is just Apple iterating and working through things, and maybe this won't come out. Maybe it will. Maybe it'll be different than what we expect. So yeah, there's any number of reasons why this could be a different product, but 3K is quite a bit. And any
3,000 is a lot. At the same time, it seems to do, based on this information, do the things that I personally feel are really important, at least in the VR space, and definitely for AR too, which is that ultra high res per eye point. And it's, I've talked to some people about VR. Like I think maybe I've had this conversation with Sam Machkovech before about the importance of that high resolution view per eye being something that I feel it really drives the technology once we get there. And we're getting better, but it's not quite at the point to where when I'm looking at a display or whatever the technology is that's pressed up right near my eyeballs, and I see the digital representation of the world in nearly as sharp of an image as I see when I'm using my eyes looking in this room. Like once we get there and the computer processing behind it is capable of creating realistic scenarios and scenes and views and stuff like that, then we're in a whole new world with this technology, in my opinion. So knowing that it's going to have, dual 8K displays, whatever the processor is that Apple's going to have going at that point, considering what we've seen with the M1 so far, and knowing that they're really doubling down on that going forward, there's a lot to be excited about from a technology standpoint. $3,000 is a lot for anything like that, if it's targeting anything close to a consumer. And maybe that won't end up being the case, but I'm really curious to see. Like, I would love to see what Apple would do in this side of technology. Absolutely.
Agreed.
So we'll see. And when we see, we'll talk about it on Tech News Weekly, which we publish every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. Go there and you can subscribe. Then you don't have to think about finding an episode, it just comes to you magically through the magic of podcast. Audio and video formats there, so just jump over there. And then real quick, I'll just mention, because I think we're rounding out the survey, so this will be the last time that you'll hear it. twit.tv/survey21. If you want the opportunity to tell us what you think we're doing well, what you think we can improve, any information that you wish to share, you can. You don't have to answer every single question. It's up to you. But twit.tv/survey21 really helps us in guiding us for the next year until the next survey to bring you what you want. And so get in there fast. I think it ends in the next day or two. So twit.tv/survey21.
Excellent. And of course, follow us on social media. We are at twit.tv on Instagram, at Twit Talk on TikTok. And if you want to follow me on social media, I am at Mikah Sargent on pretty much all of the networks. I'll be doing Smart Tech Today later today live, but of course you can subscribe to that show. And of course, check out iOS Today as well, which I record on Fridays with Rosemary Orchard. And Jason, what about you?
Well, find me occasionally tweeting at Jason Howell on Twitter. I just had an article go up this morning on Debugger at debugger.medium.com all about the C64, which is the Commodore 64 emulator that I can't remember if I mentioned it on this show, but I definitely did on All About Android. And I did a video review of it on Hands on Tech. I also wrote about it for Debugger. I'm just loving this thing. Like, I literally have my setup right here for all the shows and stuff, and right in front of me is a Commodore 64. It's like nice. Plugged in and ready to go. So like if I need a little break, I just hop over there and I play a game that some random game that's not nearly as good as I remember it being from when I was a kid. So, it's needless to say, I actually really enjoy this machine a lot. So check out my article on that if you want to read some words. Big thanks to everyone who helps us do this show every week. Burke, John Ashley at the studio, John, the engineer, everybody helps us do the show. We just really appreciate that you do so behind the scenes. So thank you. And thanks to you for watching and listening. We'll see you all next week on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Hey, folks, I'm Ant Pruitt, host of Hands of Photography here on TWiT TV. I know some of you have gotten yourself a brand new camera, or you just had a camera sitting around and can't quite figure out how to get the most out of it. Well, I have a solution. My show, Hands on Photography. So subscribe right now to learn how to get the most out of that camera. I'm going to show you how to make those images pop. I don't care if it's a Canon camera. I don't care if it's a Sony, Nikon, iPhone, Android, even an inexpensive Android device. I got you covered. So head on over to twit.tv/hop and subscribe today.